All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. So people are starting to come into the room. We're so happy to have you here today. So I'm from New Hampshire, Londonderry, New Hampshire. Where are some of you from? Go ahead and put it in the chat. So we have Hollis, New Hampshire, Rochester, New Hampshire. I'm in Rochester right now. Hampstead, Bar Harbor, Keene, Vermont. Oh my gosh, all over. Wichita, Kansas. We have Portland, Oregon, Minnesota, Milford, New Hampshire. Wow, everywhere. Vermont. That's good. New Hampshire IDA serves Vermont and Maine. So I'm glad to see some of our Vermont folks here tonight too. We're going to wait a couple minutes to get started. It takes a little while to get you all loaded into the room. Go ahead and tell us if you are a parent or a practitioner or both. Curious about that too. I know many of us are both. Parent, teacher, practitioner, both. Lots, both, teacher, practitioner. Oh, we have an OT. That's great. Both, yeah, an advocate, dyslexia specialist. Oh, we have an attorney. That's great. Both. Looks like we have a pretty good representation tonight, parents and practitioners. And both. Oh, we have principal. Excellent. An elementary interventionist. OT. Excellent. Sister and caregiver. Great. Okay, so welcome to our event. This is presented by New Hampshire IDA, Read for Parents, Research, Education, Advocacy on Dyslexia. As I mentioned, we serve Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. We are a volunteer board that is focused on the needs of children with dyslexia, and we're very happy to bring you today Dyslexia Assessment. What is it, and how can it help with Dr. Melissa Farrall? All right. Dr. Melissa Farrall is the author of Reading Assessment, Linking Language, Literacy, and Cognition, and the co-author of All About Tests and Assessments, published by Wright's Law. Melissa Farrall presently works as Director for Evaluation at the Stern Center for Language and Learning in Williston, Vermont, where she trains evaluators and conducts educational assessments. In the past, Melissa proudly taught the structure of language and assessment in the Language and Literacy program at Simmons College in Boston and at the Reading Institute in Williamston, Massachusetts. She worked as a learning disability specialist in the public schools for several years. Dr. Farrall received her doctorate from Brown University in 1981 in the area of Slavic linguistics. She received her master's degree from Rivier College in Learning Disabilities in 1994 and her certificate as a specialist in the assessment of intellectual functioning in 1999. In addition, Melissa also served on our board as treasurer and secretary at one time. So welcome, Melissa, to tonight. We're very excited to have you. Melissa will be talking about that fact sheet that I mentioned. All of our presentations for Read for Parents are based on those fact sheets, which we have found have been very useful to parents. I myself is a parent of two sons with dyslexia. And as I went through my journey on this path, I found the fact sheets to be very helpful. So we're very excited to have Melissa talking about dyslexia assessment tonight. In April, we will have Beth McClure talking about effective reading instruction for students with dyslexia. On June 9th, we will have the homeschooling fact sheet will be featured with Claudia Golda Dominguez, Marie Thibodeau, and Brittany Lovejoy as our guest speakers. August 11th, we will have Dyslexia, Stress, and Anxiety Connection with Noelle Foy. And finally, on October 13th, we will be discussing the fact sheet, Understanding Dysgraphia. We don't have a speaker yet, but we have a few great candidates in the makes. So just before we start, there are many benefits to you as a member of IDA. Overall, IDA as a group, if you join, will allow you to have connection with your community, our branches, our Facebook group, and then our corporate headquarters. It's a way for you to stay informed about dyslexia. They have a great journal called Perspectives, as well as the Annals of Dyslexia, newsletters, and there's a new IDA TV station, so great reasons to join. In addition, you can expand your professional network by being listed on their directory. As a branch, New Hampshire IDA, we're very pleased to bring you this new edition, Read for Parents. It is every other month on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. We always have an annual conference in September that we'll be announcing what that is soon. In February, we always do a Wilson Collaborative. In January, we do an annual Project Read webinar, and then we have newsletters in February and August. We also provide scholarships to all of our trainings. So there's lots of good things that we are doing to support the children with dyslexia and their families and practitioners. There are a number of membership levels. I just wanted to point out that the parent membership is only $50 a year. And then if you are a classroom teacher who has never been a member of IDA, you can now sign up for free for this year. So that's a great deal. So, because it's free. So be sure to sign up for that. So without further ado, I just want to mention that Melissa will be doing her presentation, and at the end, there will be time for a brief period for Q&A. So if you have questions, you can start putting those in the chat as we go along, or save them for the end for the Q&A. So without further ado, Melissa, welcome and thank you so much.
Hello there. I am in the process of setting up my PowerPoint. Get right with you here. Slideshow from beginning. And there we go. I think you should all be able to see me now, and hopefully you can hear me. I am coming to you from northern Vermont, where it is very dark and very cold and very snowy. We've had quite a bit of snow lately. And I'm actually very pleased to be able to talk to you about assessment of dyslexia. I'm sure that if you have decided to spend your evening with us, that you must have concerns about your children or your students. And assessment is not an easy thing. So I'm going to do my best in the 35 minutes that I have to kind of take you through some of the major issues associated with assessment and kind of give you an idea of what it is that you should be able to expect from a dyslexia evaluation. And on that note, I am going to get started. So I thought we would just begin with a slide that shows you a little bit about who we are as a population of readers. So this is a picture of a bell curve. It kind of speaks to the distribution of reading skill across the population. And at the left side of my curve, where you can see reading is a struggle, we have a group of individuals who find reading to be quite difficult, if not one of the hardest things they'll ever do in their life. The middle, sort of about 2/3 of the population, learns to read with I'm going to say fair degree of ease, but certainly benefit from instruction. And that instruction would certainly improve the quality of their spelling and enable them to decode probably more challenging, more complex words with greater ease. And then we have like the upper part of the population that actually learns to read quite easily. These are the kids who walk into our classrooms in kindergarten already reading. They're very lucky because Mother Nature has equipped them to transform their brains into a reading network that's able to handle the demands of print. So you can see from my chart that we do have concerns about the lower third sort of the population. Not all of those individuals actually have reading disorders. So the percentage of children with reading disorders or dyslexia, if you will, somewhere around 10, 11, 12%, somewhere in that range. Okay. I'm going to start with just a few definitions because the evaluation business is one that really depends heavily on common understandings of things and also common understanding of the rules and regulations that we have that governs this process. So dyslexia is a specific learning disability, and we say it's neurobiological in origin. It means it's intrinsic to the individual. It happens in the myriad of processes in our brain. It's characterized by challenges with accurate and fluent word recognition. We also see challenges with spelling and decoding. And these difficulties typically, that word is really important, result from a deficit in the phonological component of language. Now, phonological, okay, is a word that refers to the speech sound system. So the English language has 44 speech sounds in it. And in order to become a reader, your brain has to be consciously aware that there are speech sounds in words, and then has to be able to link those speech sounds to letter symbols. So we say this challenge has to be unexpected in relation to cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. So we really don't want to be identifying kids as being dyslexic if they've never really had the opportunity to have had science-based, research-based instruction. So if you are dyslexic, you may also experience additional consequences. So you're probably going to have trouble with reading comprehension. It's really hard to understand what it is you're reading if you can't, for example, read all of the words. So if you can't read them with a fair degree of ease and automaticity, right? And the other thing that's sort of a natural consequence of having a difficulty with reading is that you're probably not going to be reading a whole lot. So these children that we have with reading disorders, or even just fall in that bottom third, right, of the population, don't particularly enjoy reading. And it's a very human reaction not to want to pursue things that we find kind of challenging and unpleasant. So these are kids and adults, right, who don't read a whole lot, and as a result, don't get access to the vocabulary and background knowledge that is pretty much only found in print. These are vocabulary words and so forth that we don't typically encounter at the dinner table or when we're talking with friends. So one of the first things I said to you is that dyslexia is a specific learning disability. So we're going to touch upon this definition also kind of briefly. So specific learning disability disorder, all right, in one of the or more basic psychological processes involved in understanding or using language, spoken or written, okay, and it may manifest itself in the imperfect ability, which is an interesting word here, right? To listen, think, read, spell, write, spell, or do mathematical calculations. All right, and then there's some language in the definition, which was originally put into the definition to ensure that a lot of the terminology that we had previously would be recognized under the umbrella of specific learning disabilities. So some of the terminology which had been floating around prior to the 1960s included perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction. Here is dyslexia, right? We get all excited, and developmental aphasia. Right? And the term specific learning disability is not supposed to include a learning problem primarily due to visual, hearing, or motor challenges, to mental retardation, emotional issues, or environmental, cultural, or economic disadvantage. And I just want to come back to this for a minute and say that word primarily is really important, because it's entirely possible that you would have children who are economically disadvantaged, or who lacked cultural opportunities or environmental stimulation, right? Who are actually dyslexic. So it's kind of one of those terms that's kind of like vague in its notion, and it's purposely so. Learning disabilities for reading, all right, are identified under 3 basic headings: basic reading, reading fluency, and reading comprehension. And sometimes one of the things that I see happen in teams is that there's a presumption, for example, that if you are identified in basic reading, then certainly you would warrant instruction in decoding and word recognition. There's a presumption that if you are identified in reading fluency, then our primarily concern would be trying to get you to read faster, right? Similarly, the presumption is that if you have a learning disability in the area of reading comprehension, that we would work with you on things like understanding the main idea or supporting details. Well, the fact is that these are kind of gateways into the special education system. And for a lot of teams, it's a matter of where you meet criteria for identification. These areas do not specify areas of instruction, because it's very likely that if you have a challenge with reading fluency, or if you have a challenge with reading comprehension, that you would actually require instruction in the area of basic reading, which would basically mean how to decode words more successfully. There's often a lot of words are important. I started out kind of by saying that definitions are important. So words are really important. And sometimes when we talk about children with reading problems, we end up using different vocabulary. In essence, what is a different language? So the educational terminology, right, for children with reading disorders is specific learning disability in basic reading, reading fluency, or reading comprehension. The term dyslexia is widely used by the scientific community. It's used by the medical community. It's used by the international community that's concerned with reading research, and less so used by school personnel. My experience has been, this is primarily because the word dyslexia is not included in a lot of the textbooks that teachers are trained with. So that when you go into a team meeting and you start speaking about dyslexia, you may be encountering a group of people who are really quite not too sure what it is, and they may actually have misunderstandings about dyslexia, such as it's primarily visual in nature, which make the conversation really difficult, and also make it difficult to determine what it is that we're going to assess. I've been to meetings where I've been told that dyslexia doesn't exist. I've been told it's so broadly defined that everyone could qualify as being dyslexic. I've been told that we shouldn't be using the term dyslexia because it upsets people. But what I want you to know is that the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services said there's no reason why we can't have, in the context of our meetings, discussions using terminology such as dyslexia, dyscalculia, which refers to math, and dysgraphia, which refers to written expression. All right, so we can certainly use this terminology. The educational sort of legal terminology is still going to be specific learning disability in the area of, all right. And the other thing I want you to know is that just because someone diagnoses your child with dyslexia, dyscalculia, or dysgraphia, it doesn't mean that you are automatically qualified for special education services. You still have to go through the process, and you still have to meet eligibility criteria. So what is it we see with dyslexia? Difficulty learning letters and their sounds. Challenges are often apparent in kindergarten and first grade. Reading quickly enough to understand. Persisting with longer reading assignments. We see challenges with spelling and overall issues with putting language on paper, written language. Some kids have difficulty with their math facts and mathematical operations. Some children actually, it will affect their ability, their development of their speech milestones, their ability to retrieve words at the precise moment they're needed. And some kids will experience a profound issue in learning a second language. So, what do we see? We often see with dyslexia sort of global underachievement. We see kids who don't like school, families who experience a lot of stress over homework and poor grades, a very understandable reluctance to read, all right? Kids who look like they lack motivation and persistence. I hear this a lot, you know, so-and-so, Johnny's really not interested in learning, just really not motivated. Lack of confidence, poor self-esteem, sometimes anxiety over learning. We have a group of students who are dyslexic who sometimes in about 4th grade start to act out and seek attention in other ways. It can affect the realm of math, particularly when it comes to trying to read those math word problems. And we may very well see a limited vocabulary because it is through reading that we develop our vocabulary after about grade 3. So reading is not just important sort of to learn about the world, it's important for your intellectual functioning. So with respect to evaluations, we know that we have a pre-referral process so that in most schools, children are provided with increasing levels of support. And in theory, their progress with all of the support is monitored. And children who continue to struggle may well then be referred for evaluation. You thought I'd never get here, but I am getting here. All right, so a child might be referred because of difficulty with reading or difficulty with writing. And let's just presume that the team opts to explore this further and initiate an evaluation. Your evaluation, the team would get together and discuss what this evaluation would look like. The evaluation really should cover all areas related to the suspected disability. And, you know, I will just say at this particular point that sometimes people will call me and they'll say, I want the dyslexia test. Tell me what you know, like, this is what I want my kid to have. And my response is, it's really not just one test. It's tests that look at a lot of different things. We're going to look at the list later. Sometimes school districts will call and say, we want the dyslexia evaluation. You're only supposed to be looking at reading. And I'll have to come back and say, you know, language is a big part, written expression is a big part of this. Sometimes math is a part of it. But so your evaluation should be designed, right, to look at all areas related to the suspected reading problem, right? Parents have a right to participate in this process and certainly consent. The evaluation is conducted and then everyone reconvenes to talk about the results of the evaluation. So Libby, I'm just going to kind of move on here in the interest of time. So depending on where you live, the process by which your child might become eligible for special education will vary. So, you know, if you are in the state of New Hampshire looks for a processing disorder, a processing deficit, and then for evidence that this child has just not been successful and not meeting kind of grade or age appropriate standards. All right. In Vermont, it's very different. Vermont kind of has somehow adhered to the old discrepancy formula. Vermont actually requires that there be tremendous evidence of failure. They require, for those of you who are knowledgeable about such things, 22.5-point discrepancy between what's defined as your ability, like to learn, versus your actual academic achievement, right? In some cases, schools are using sort of a response to intervention process where they are providing increased amounts of support, monitoring a child's response, and a child who doesn't respond to all of that additional help might then be evaluated for a suspicion of having a learning disability. So the actual eligibility is going to vary depending on where you live. So who is it that can conduct a dyslexia evaluation? All right, so it can be, a dyslexia evaluation can be done by a variety of people with a variety of credentials. If you are going through the public school, that person is probably going to be a school psychologist, as well as maybe a learning disability specialist, special education teachers. It could be whatever the educational sort of terminology is. But if you're seeking an evaluation outside of school, you might actually look within the realms of psychology or neuropsychology. Right? This is not something you would go to your medical doctor for, right? Because medical doctors are really not trained in what dyslexia is. I actually work with the UVM medical school, and I'm always kind of amazed at how little the physicians know about learning disabilities generally or dyslexia specifically. All right, I would say that regardless of who is doing your evaluation, you really want to be sure that your evaluator is knowledgeable about reading disorders and about instruction, because not all school psychologists, not all psychologists, not all neuropsychologists are knowledgeable about reading. It's a field with a lot that's happening. We now know more than ever before about how to identify reading disorders and how to treat them. So you really want to be sure that your evaluator has knowledge of current instructional methodologies, what we refer to as structured literacy. When should you test? Oh, gee, I hear a lot from parents and also from school teachers who are kind of afraid to have young children tested. And what I want to say to you is, like, there's just no better time than the present. This is something that's much better to do when children are young than when they are early, because young children's brains are more plastic. Young children's brains are more receptive to instruction. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that we can't turn older students into readers, or that we couldn't take an adult, right, and evaluate that adult and turn that adult into a reader. It's just that it becomes more challenging as individuals get older. The dose of instruction might have to increase. It takes more instruction to develop the same skills in a sixth grader than it does in a first and second grader. And the other thing is that every year that we delay the evaluation and instruction is a year that that child is not reading. All right, remember, I said to you that reading is a pathway to develop our thinking skills and our vocabulary and our higher level reading skills, all of those good things, so that every year that we lose with children as readers is really time that we don't know how to make up for. All right, so the earlier the better. We have a lot of research that tells us that reading challenges are often, not always, apparent in kindergarten and first grade. And what I've listed here are 3 seminal studies that have addressed, like, so-called delays in reading. So it used to be thought that if your child was delayed in reading, that at some point they would wake up and their brain, it would just click into place, and it would be like, wow, I can read. Well, it turns out that's a nice little fantasy. I wish it were as easy as that. But the fact is that when children are delayed in the development of their reading skills, we need to be concerned. All right, so we now know that almost 90% of poor readers in first grade who don't finish first grade reading on grade level will never read on grade level. Now, I know that sounds really dire, and I don't want people to be going, oh my goodness, because the fact is that we can change that trajectory if we step in and give children knowledgeable, sort of science-based instruction that's going to address the key deficits associated with dyslexia, which is this phonological processing thing that we'll talk about, and also teach them how it is that we represent the sounds of our language on paper in print. All right. So additional study, Francis et al. Said that, wow, they'd looked at readers from first through ninth grade, and they said, gee, these kids never catch up. And then Shaywitz, who's one of our dyslexia authorities, basically confirmed that young readers do not catch up unless we step in and give them some really good support and instruction. All right, so the earlier the better. All right, but at the same time, I'm going to tell you that's not, I'm simplifying it sort of a little bit, because there are some challenges in testing really young children, and the tests that we use by their very nature are not always sensitive to the skills that we want to see in place in kindergarten and first grade. And if you have any experience in working with young children, then you know that that they have a limited attention span, right? We can't test them as much maybe as we would like to. So we also have to be content with a smaller sample of their behavior, of their performance. And sometimes that means with that small sample, these kids get elevated scores and they may actually pull sort of these average type scores, even though everyone around them recognizes that they are having trouble reading. So earlier is better, right? It's hard to make up for lost time. So what is it that you can do, right, to help prepare for an evaluation? So when you're working with an evaluator, whether that evaluator is in the school or outside of the school, it's really helpful to be clear about your concerns and all of your reasons for testing. So we generally ask you to complete a developmental history form. It's going to have a lot of questions about developmental milestones and when your child learned to walk and when your child learned learn to speak in sentences. I'd have questions related to health history. I mean, sort of all of these good things. And all of that's important to us because it helps us make good decisions about the kind of testing that we want to do. All right. We are going to ask you for copies of any previous testing that you have. We would love to see those report cards. And I actually like to see work samples, writing samples. And I would ask that you sign our releases so that we can talk to your children's teachers and anyone else that may help us understand the kinds of instruction that your child has and the full range of their strengths, right, and their weaknesses. It's a good idea to let your child know that they're going to come for testing, so a typical evaluation for a young child, it might be 4 or 5 hours. That doesn't mean we're going to do it all in one session. It kind of depends. Older students might stay for might be tested for 6 hours. At the Stern Center, we also do a lot of adults who are going into law school and medical and so forth, and they actually may come for more than one day. It could be 10, 12 hours of testing. It's kind of, we do our best to keep kids entertained and to keep everyone happy. We provide kids with breaks. You can ask your evaluator if it's okay to provide a snack. I struggle a little bit when kids come in and they've been told that we're going to play games all day, because I really don't want to disappoint anyone. And while we might play a few games, we really have a bit of work to do. So I kind of say to kids, it's probably going to be a little bit like a school day, but we're also going to do some puzzles and some fun things. So I think it's nice when kids have sort of an understanding of what that day is going to be like. Please make sure your child has breakfast, right? And a good night's sleep, all right? And don't bring your child in for testing if they're sick. So I think it's really important when we test kids that we be able to say that their performance is due to that they achieve the scores that are reflective of their true abilities. And kids who are sick just don't perform well, right? And you don't want to make your evaluator sick either. So good idea to ask your evaluator sort of when the report will be available, and really important to let your evaluator know if you have any pressing deadlines so that you can have a discussion about perhaps, hopefully, maybe getting that report before that big meeting. Okay, so what is it that you should expect from a report? Reports are fairly standard in their presentation. All right, all reports consist of headers with identifying information. You always want to be sure that's correct. We do a background history. We should do our best to explain to you how it is, what the different meaning of the different scoring systems that we are using. We're going to talk about your child's behavior during testing and how hard they worked. We may talk about challenges with attention or impulsivity, evidence of your child's oral language skill, how well he or she communicates. We certainly are going to discuss test performance. So each subtest, each test that we give, we're going to talk about the things that your child did do and the things that he or she did not do. And certainly we're going to discuss scores. At the end, there should be a summary that kind of pulls it all together, as well as recommendations for instruction, accommodations, right? And possible referrals to other specialists. So if you get a report from evaluator and you see a mistake, you should just really let the evaluator know. Like we all try to give you a perfect report. Sometimes, sometimes if you typo slip in, but some types of errors are more important than others. We really want to be sure we have, for example, child's age, birth date, and so forth correct. But you should just let us know if we make a mistake, and then we'll certainly fix that and get that back to you. The tests we use are a little different from the tests that children take in school. And this is kind of, I'm going to try to do this in a very brief amount of time, but this is something that when evaluators train, they spend a significant amount of time learning about. The tests we use give scores that permit us to make a comparison between the child we're testing and his or her peer group. All right, so if I'm testing a child who's 8 years old, I want to compare this 8-year-old child's performance to other children who are also 8 years old. And we have two types of comparisons we can make. We can generally compare children by their age, or we can compare children by their grades. And long story short, we generally compare children by age for the purpose of like a specific learning disability evaluation. All right. These tests, in order to make that comparison, the tests have to be, everyone has to get the test in exactly the same way. So all of these tests are scripted, and we have evaluators spend a lot of time learning how to administer a test in accordance with the specific rules for their test. So there's certain things we can say, there's certain things we can't say. We're not allowed to help children, although under certain circumstances we can prompt kids for like a more detailed example. But the only way that that comparison between the child we're testing and the peer group is valid is if we know that every child has had that test under the same conditions. So the idea with this type of testing is that it's going to place children along this continuum. We saw this bell curve before. We started out with it from weak to strong, all right? And that we know, like a bell curve kind of tells us that most individuals are going to earn scores in the average range, and that very few individuals are going to earn either very, very low scores or very, very high scores. All right. You're going to find that different tests use different scoring systems. There are several different scoring systems. It is the evaluator's job to make sure that you understand the scoring system that is being used. So, I'll say, to make it even more complicated, some tests will even use multiple scoring systems, one for like what we call composite scores and one for individual subtest scores. So there are sort of like some bits of really important information that you should know that will help you kind of eyeball how your child is doing. So scoring systems will generally tell you what the average score here is. And on my chart here, you can see standard score, the mean, which is the average, is a score of 100. That's a 50th percentile rank, which means it's smack dab in the middle, right, of my population. And the standard deviation describes the spread of scores is 50. It sort of tells me that my children who earn anywhere from 85 to 115 are kind of sort of in the average range. And I'm using that term really loosely, So by the same token, there's another scoring system called scaled scores. The average is a scale of like 1 to 19. The average score, smack dab average, would be a 10, 50th percentile rank. And my deviation would be plus or minus 3. So anything between 7 and 13 would kind of fall in the average range. So you can see from my chart here that we have different scoring systems. They all kind of have different gradients. It's kind of like switching between inches to feet to yards. All right. And so you know that 36 inches, right, is 3 feet, is 1 yard. This is kind of the same thing. So if your evaluator gives you sort of a chart like this, and tells you what the mean is, that average score, what the standard deviation is, you can kind of figure out, in kind of a grossly speaking, whether your kid is kind of in the average range or maybe falling above or maybe falling below. So what I've just discussed with you are different types of standard scores, but all standard scores can be equated to something called percentile rank. So you may be told that your child has a score that places him in the 25th percentile rank, which means that your child did better than or equal to 25 kids out of 100. So the percentile rank scores, in some ways, they seem like they're maybe easier to work with because I often envision like runners of a race, and this analogy comes to me from my mentor. Like everything I'm saying tonight came from him, John Willis, who I believe is out there listening with you this evening. But think about it like the runners of a race, and so the really fast runners. There just a few of them come in, and then the bulk of the runners are average. So they kind of come in a large group, and then we have the stragglers at the end. So percentile ranks are tricky, right? Because for those of us who are used to like school tests, we often confuse them with like getting 50% on a math test. So if, for example, you get a 50% on your math test, right, you've done really badly on that math test, right? You probably failed that test. However, in the percentile rank universe, right, if you have a 50th percentile, that means you are smack dab average, and that your performance is equal than or better to 50 individuals out of that 100. Oftentimes, when we do a report, we get requests for age or grade equivalence. And sometimes I'll hand my report over and a parent will come back to me and say, you didn't tell me what grade level my child is functioning at. And the fact is that that's kind of hard to do with these tests. These tests are not really designed in such a way as to give you an age equivalent or a grade equivalent. Although many of these tests have tables that kind of purport to produce them. So on this type of testing, right, where we're comparing our child's performance to other individuals, the age or grade equivalents that you may get if you request them don't really specify the level at which your child is working. It's kind of they provide a level that's based on, I'm going to say this carefully, you can read it right here on the slide, the number of correct responses that students at that particular grade or age makes. And so it's really more of an average than anything else. And it doesn't, they're not generated with an actual classroom in mind, with an actual grade level in mind. And, averages can be very, very deceiving. So we actually try to train evaluators not to use them because they're so deceptive in their nature. And every test manual I think that I've ever looked at has provided them, but also kind of said, the small print always says, don't provide these. These are the least accurate way we have of measuring children's performance. So that's kind of the really quick explanation. Short story on that is better not to use them because they don't really specify the level your child is working at, and you can't compare them. So if you can't say that, well, last year, my child tested at a beginning third grade level. This year, he tested at a mid third grade level. That means he only made, 3 or 4 or 5 months, progress. It just doesn't kind of work that way. They're not really designed to be subtracted. So enough on that. So in your report, you're going to get scores. You are going to get percentile ranks, and you are probably going to get labels. This is the chart that John Willis devised. You can see that John Willis and Ron Dumont, his evaluator partner in crime here. Anyway, it's really helpful to be able to talk about children in terms of labels. I think that, it's like part of the English language. We can kind of indicate whether children are below average, whether they're below average. The fact is that different tests may come with different sets of labels, so that what might be described as average by one test publisher may be low average by another, or below average by another. So it's important not to be wedded too much, right, to these language labels, and just think about them as general descriptors. So where the way I was trained under Dr. Willis, we kind of translated all the different labels into one set of labels that were based on a 1 to 9 scoring system, and that seemed to to help so that we could all speak in a common language. Where I work now, we have a different system for translating all of the labels into a common system. But, you know, I think one of the important things to know is that if your child receives an average score, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's not a problem. All right, so that, you know, children can earn average scores and they can have gaps in lower level skills that that could really impede their functioning. So for example, it's really hard to do long division if you're not too sure about how to do subtraction with regrouping, that sort of thing. But you might be able to do enough problems to earn an average score without really having a solid foundation. So while we may speak in terms of scores and percentile ranks and language labels, it's really important to have a good understanding of what it is that your child did and what it is that he or she did not do with respect to the tasks on any one test. I thought you might want to see like sort of what scores look like on a report. So this is something called the Comprehensive Test of Phonological Processing, which is a test that's very commonly used in when we're looking at dyslexia. And it looks at several areas, but you can see here that we have a column for standard scores and scale scores. There are two scoring systems going on here. Everything gets translated into a percentile rank. And if, believe me, if you're earning a first or second percentile rank, you're not doing very, very well, right? And then we have language labels to describe the ranges. Sometimes when we get scores, as you can see back here, you can see that the composite score is actually a product of the individual subtest score. So the phonological memory composite score, so your memory composite consists of the scores, right, from both your memory, your ability to recall numbers and your ability to repeat nonsense words, all right? So sometimes composite scores are pretty much in the range. So if you have average decoding scores, average word recognition, you might get an average basic reading composite score. Sometimes, however, composite scores can be kind of off the mark because they're kind of like an average. All right, they're not exactly, but close enough for our purposes tonight. So they're kind of like an average. And this is a case where we have a child who has a letter and word identification score that's nice and healthy, 63rd percentile rank. We have a reading comprehension score that's a 9th percentile rank, really not so great. And the reading composite is a 27th percentile rank, which is a score that would be considered by most accounts in the average range. So the composite suggests this child's ability is actually average, but the discrepancy between the scores, right, suggests that we are experiencing a significant problem in the realm of reading comprehension, all right, and this child has a problem. So I put up my brain slide, you know, here. I just kind of wanted to kind of speak to you just a little bit about the fact that in order to become readers, we have to set up a reading network in the brain. This doesn't come naturally to about 1/3 of the population. We have to begin by discriminating speech sounds. We have to link those to letter sounds, that letter sound area, right? That's our primary pathway. And then we have to set up a secondary pathway, which we do through reading, linking speech sounds to visual words where we store images of letter sequences. So a good evaluation, right, wants to make sure that we understand how it is your child is developing their reading network. And we're going to certainly test reading comprehension. And then we're going to test skills in two main areas. We're going to look at decoding skills and we're going to look at listening skills. So under fluency, right, I have word recognition skills and spelling. We may want to look at alphabet knowledge, and we're going to look at skills that fall under that phonological processing umbrella, that your child's ability to discern individual speech sounds in words, and the ability to retrieve language-based information really quickly. It's called rapid naming. The other thing we want to look at is listening comprehension, and we're going to want to look at, because this is important for once you make your way through that code, your listening comprehension, your receptive language skills going to dictate what it is you're able to understand of the language in print. So we may want to look at vocabulary, syntax, pragmatics, which is about language style and your ability to derive meanings, and also your background knowledge and your skill with inferencing. All right. So this phonological piece should be a part of every dyslexia evaluation. All right, phonemic awareness, the fact that words can be divided into individual speech sounds, is the main gating factor. So in 90% of kids who have difficulty with reading, the problem is going to reside in this area. And I still see some evaluations that don't look at this area. Phonological awareness develops in the same way for all. All right, and children's brains kind of perceive that words consist of syllables. They then focus on individual speech sounds, and they learn that words have sounds at the beginning. The first sound in melt is mm. Words have sounds at the end. The last sound in melt is t, and that words have sound in the middle. This is the hardest one. So that that ul sound in the word melt, all right, may not be readily apparent to a lot of kids who have difficulty in this area. So we have lots of different ways of testing phonological awareness. Most important are tasks that permit us to look at how children discern speech sounds and manipulate them. So elision is a task where we ask kids to say a word without a sound. Say melt without the mm. Say melt without the t. Say melt without the ul. All right. And I'm just going to move on running. I think I'm going to try to capitalize my time a little bit. So in addition to this awareness of speech sounds and words, we have to be able to retrieve language-based information like quickly and efficiently. And there's something that should be part of your evaluation that's called rapid naming. I have a picture here, which I'm going to show you. It's a stopwatch task where we say go, and we ask kids to name colors, numbers, letters, or familiar objects as quickly as they can. We like to use letters and numbers because it has more to do with the act of reading. And this rapid naming thing is kind of like the processing speed on a computer. It's kind of kids who do poorly in this area, kids who are slow, they experience reading as though they are like bicycling uphill when all of their friends are coasting down. So the reading task becomes much more laborious for them, right? It's hard to do it and enjoy it. And it's hard because you're working so hard to remember what it is that you've read. So rapid naming sounds really easy. It's pretty complicated from a processing perspective. Kids take in the symbols through the eyes. They retrieve the language label. You tell your teeth, tongue, and lips and breath what to do. You speak it and verify, and you keep on going on. It's all about the rapid cycling. This kind of testing allows us to differentiate between different profiles of reading problems. So we have some kids who have a weakness in just phonemic awareness. We have some kids who have decent phonemic awareness, but their RAN is slow. And then we have a group of kids who are just kind of weak across the board. So if I had my druthers and I could be like in public schools, I would want to group my children for their instruction in terms of their profile as readers, you know, and maybe not according to like, I used to teach, so I can say, you know, sometimes we had to group kids according to like the time of day that they were free. But it makes sense to group children with similar profiles, you know, together because we want to ensure that they're going to get the most out of their instruction and that the instruction that we're going to give them is going to be paced in accordance with their ability to master the material. So children who are in first, second, and third grade are going to require 60 to 90 minutes of instruction a day. It's kind of like exercise. You're better in doing it in regular doses. You're not going to get much in the way of results if you try to do this one day a week, right? Children with a more complicated profile, that dual deficit profile, are going to probably require a larger dose of instruction because not only do we have to teach their brains that words have sounds, we have to teach them, give them enough practice and instruction so they can execute their skills with automaticity. So this was just, I thought it might be helpful for you to see kind of like what a kind of case study might look like. And what you need to know about my scoring system is that if these are stay nines, it's a range of 1 to 9, and anything 4, 5, and 6 is kind of sort of in the average range. So this is a child who has very poor reading comprehension. Listening comprehension is nice and strong, right? And so that we suspect that those language skills are pretty intact. And indeed, if you look at the bottom of my chart, you'll see that receptive vocabulary, understanding of word meanings is like really healthy. Syntax, the ability to formulate sentences is good. The ability to draw conclusions or inference is nice and strong. And this particular kid, although she knows a lot of words, all right, has difficulty coming up with words at the precise moment they are needed. So that's kind of low. So what does this kid look like as a reader? Word identification, all right, reading regular words, irregular words is okay, it's a 4. But this child is not able for the life of her to sound out nonsense words. And you may wonder why it is we use nonsense words. We use them because it provides a way of looking at to what degree kids have internalized the rules of phonics and can apply them to words they haven't seen before. Which is really the hallmark of an independent reader. So we have a group of words that we've kind of memorized, right? We're not really good at figuring out the whole code of print thing. Our spelling is pretty poor. Now, spelling actually goes along with word recognition and nonsense words. So that's kind of a package of skills that we're looking at. And because we can't decode words, like because we don't know the rules of phonics, we can't read with any degree of speed. So our fluency is really reduced. So where did this come from? Why did this happen? For that, we go to our phonological testing, right? Top right-hand corner of my table. Our memory is actually okay. That's a solid average score. But this is a child. Sasha does not know that words can be broken into individual speech sounds. So she's never been able to figure out the sound symbol correspondence thing. Her rapid naming is good, which is kind of nice to see. So, I would say that she probably has potential to read with fluency, but this is a kid who needs direct systematic instruction, right? Using a structured literacy approach that's going to teach her about the sound system of the language, right? And how to relate those sounds to letter symbols. And we're going to do this through multisensory channels. All right, we're going to teach, do lots of fun activities with phonemic awareness. We're going to teach word recognition, decoding skills. We're going to teach spelling, right? And we're also going to pay attention to the development of vocabulary, sentence structure, oral comprehension skills, and written expression. So all these things together in a way that's systematic and cumulative. And by that, I mean, we're going to teach one skill at a time until it's mastered. And then we're going to move on to the next skill and teach that until it's mastered, until we eventually start with very simple sound symbol correspondences and eventually end up reading words that come to the English language from Greek. So on that note, I've tried to do a lot in this time. I've come to the end. I am happy to take your questions if you have any.
Melissa, thank you so much. We have so many questions for you. That was excellent. What a great summary. So one of the questions right off the bat is, what are the unique features of orthographic dyslexia? Can you address those?
Okay, so I'm going to do my best to address this kind of quickly because it's really kind of a complicated thing. So the fact is that the different kinds, that there's an umbrella of profiles, right, under dyslexia. All dyslexia is inherently phonological in nature. Remember that picture of my slide of the brain that I showed you? Let me just come back here for a second. And I said, so the first thing we have to do is we have to develop a pathway from the speech sound area to the letter sound area. That's the phonological pathway. That has to be established before we can think about building orthographic skills, which is how we represent speech sounds with letter symbols and that visual word form area. The name is a little bit deceptive, but that visual word form area is built through reading experience. It is what you think of when you talk about orthographic processing, and it is built through having a foundation in phonological processing and then being able to read and being able to store letter sequences in that area for rapid access. All right, the idea that orthographic dyslexia is separate and distinct from phonologic dyslexia is a misunderstanding. It's kind of a myth, all right, because your orthographic skills only develop on the foundation of the phonological processing, right? So oftentimes when we have kids who kind of look like we might want to call them orthographic in nature, the deficit is really deep in their phonological system, and we have to go back and teach them the phonology, all about speech sounds, how to link letter symbols, and we have to get them reading because that's the only way they build those orthographic skills.
Excellent. Thank you so much. One of the questions is from a pediatrician and would like to know some pearls of wisdom to help parents and patients get evaluations and interventions they need. Do you have any great suggestions?
My number one suggestion is if you believe a child has an issue with reading, he or she probably does. My experience has been over the years that very few parents are wrong, about that. It doesn't mean that the issue always rises to the level of a disability, but it probably does need attention. And it turns out that we in this country, based upon like our the National Assessment of Educational Progress, we have sort of 60% of the population out there that's not proficient readers, right? Which is a little scary, like when you think about it, because it has implications for how you for development of your vocabulary and your thinking skills and so forth. Those individuals don't all have like reading disorders, but they all are really not highly skilled in decoding, and they don't have good access to the content that we put in print. So if you think there's a problem, one of the things you can do is, basically write a letter to your school district and say, I believe that my child has a specific learning disability. Tell them a little bit about the nature of your child's history and difficulties, but be sure you put it in writing, because sometimes these things just get lost when you don't. So act on your concern. If you are concerned, you are probably correct, and this doesn't go away by itself.
Absolutely, absolutely. Lifelong disability, that's for sure, or lifelong effects. Well, thank you so much, Melissa. We have lots of other questions, but we must end now because it's almost 8 o'clock. I want to let people know that the recording of this event, as well as the PowerPoint, will eventually be on our website. We are redesigning our website, so we'll get it up for you as soon as possible. Before we leave, I want to mention, I didn't get to do this at the beginning, I forgot. Andrea Pollock is our host tonight and managed our webinar. Andrea is part of our volunteer board. She is a certified educator currently working in special education as a reading teacher in the New Hampshire Public Schools. She's a member of the professional staff at the Children's Dyslexia Centers in Nashua, where she's working on becoming a certified trainer. So thank you, Andrea, for running this webinar. You did a beautiful job today. I just want to mention that our next Read for Parents will be on Wednesday, the 14th of April, and it will be with Beth McClure, and she will be talking about effective reading instruction for students with dyslexia. Again, that's that fact sheet. So we hope that you'll be able to make it to that event. So thank you everyone for attending, and thank you, Melissa. What a great evening and informative for our parents and practitioners. Good night, everyone.